We have been working with this e-commerce brand for around about 1 year, and in this time period we scaled it by 214% while keeping the ROAS intact. And in today's video I want to talk about exactly how we did it, the steps we have taken, the strategies that we use here, and if you run an e-commerce brand, and specifically if you struggle with scaling because it seems like you hit an invisible ceiling or you have some other issues, then this video is exactly for you, and I highly encourage you to stay until the end because I will talk you through a whole bunch of different actions and strategies and tactics that we have applied to actually break through this invisible ceiling and get this brand to where it is right now. Now, very shortly up front, those are not USD figures, right? So before you look at those 7 million, this actually Hong Kong dollars, so it's round about, I think, like an eighth or something of that. So we're not in the millions territory yet with that particular client. I would say the client here is slightly below our typical average in terms of size. We work with many much larger brands and some smaller brands as well. But the most important point here is that struggle to scale beyond that invisible ceiling. So little backstory, this client sells primarily phone cases, right? So relatively cheap items, but they have all kinds of add-ons and upsells so that their average order value is actually quite decent. And the struggle that they had is there is endless competition, right? And they sell in all kinds of countries. So we have a total of 25 active campaigns. It used to be much more than that because they sell literally everywhere. And we went through a very careful process of testing a whole bunch of things until we basically got to the point where we are right now. But the point is they have hundreds of thousands of SKUs, different designs and colors and sizes. And then you have different phone models and then you have upsells. So it's a huge, complex operation right there. And I want to now take you through the different steps. So at the very beginning, what was the first thing that we did? Well, of course, we did a deep dive. We looked under the hood, checked what they were doing, look at the numbers, look at the store, etc., to prepare our actual work. And then next up, we have done what we always do, which is an initial cleaning, right? So I don't want to come in and take the campaigns and throw all of them out that are not working or that are just barely working and take the winners and pause them to build our own campaigns. But rather, as you can see here, those campaigns have existed before, okay? So we have taken those shopping campaigns here, for example, and scaled them 200%, 240%, 100%, etc. Of course, we have also thrown many campaigns out. I don't want to say that we have taken every campaign, optimized it, scaled it, came up with our setup, and everything we did was perfect and everything that was there before was terrible. Of course, that was not the case. But as you can see here, we were, so to speak, like breeding the winners, testing new approaches, stopping things that didn't work out well, and made sure that we were scaling sort of step by step that way. One thing that I noticed very early on is that the account lacks negative keywords. And that is something that I did very early because I will tell you in a second, because of the structure and the type of products that they sell, right? So if we go into the shared library to the exclusion list, all right, so there's always a little bit of a delay because I have this tool here that blurs my stuff. It doesn't work perfectly, so just so you don't wonder. So we have a bunch of negative keyword lists now. Previously, they had these small ones, a little bit of negatives, but what I realized, what I found out after doing the initial deep dive and research is that there are millions of search queries and people oftentimes use variations of keywords that don't really make sense for us in our context, okay? So think about selling, I don't know, a Lord of the Rings phone case. I might be searching for Lord of the Rings related queries that seem quite relevant in the first place, but after doing a fairly large analysis, I realized that unless they use something like phone case or phone or present or gift or accessory, plus the same thing in all kinds of languages, which made this process a lot more complex, the conversion rate was much lower. Now, this might not be surprising, but if you have millions of search queries, hundreds of thousands of product variations, multiple countries and languages, boiling this all down to a single strategy is quite difficult. So what I did then is, over the course of several months, I basically went through and came up with thousands, as you can see here, negative keywords, primarily in exact match, and that's the important point, to make sure that we're getting the most performance out of this. Because if I went just ahead and said, okay, let's use Lord of the Rings as a broad match negative keyword, well, then it would have blocked all the traffic for Lord of the Rings relevant phone cases. So what we had to do here was to literally very carefully go through keywords one by one by hand And I can tell you that these thousands of negatives, a very, very large percentage of those we have been manually excluding in like many hours of actual work. It took time. It took, we basically exported the whole thing, went through Google Sheet, added a bunch of filters to make sure that it works better. But now I can tell you that the results is that with all these negatives that we're applying to most of the active campaigns, we're getting tremendously better performance overall. Or in other words, we were able to scale without actually sacrificing ROAS, which has always been a huge problem. Afterwards, the campaign or the account when we started used a whole bunch of PMax campaigns, but they were all over the place, right? They were very mixed. They were always like all products. So my thought was, okay, it's very likely that the account will only sell products via shopping, right? Let's face it, they had hundreds of thousands of SKUs. They had very standard static images because with so many products, you cannot really customize images too much. So I thought and I said, hey guys, to my team, let's do product only, shopping only. And this initially worked very well, but very quickly we realized, okay, this basically gets us to some ceilings again, because with all these, shopping campaigns right there, now we still have some of them, but we had way more than that when I did this first test. We realized, okay, they're for some reason not really scalable anymore, right? We tested all kinds of all kinds of bidding strategies. I applied my negatives, and with those negatives, I was able to spend a lot more, and we were getting, 30-40% more performance. But then again, we hit a ceiling, things were dropping off a little bit, and I realized we have to do something differently. And that is where, after all these things, first of all, I grouped products into numerous categories. So instead of just saying, hey, we have, products of this and that price range or whatever, we now said, okay, if they belong to a certain category, like again, Lord of the Rings, we tag them dynamically with labels. We tag them by price level. We tag them by whether they have been bestsellers or not, whether they were seasonal or not. And with all those tags, we have then been able to say, okay, instead of just pushing products all over the place, we have campaigns for these different nuances. And this worked tremendously well, right? So we had smaller shopping campaigns. They were only spending the equivalent maybe of like $150 per day or $100 per day. But they were so nuanced that they have been able to scale products individually, that were normally lost under or among all these other swaths of numerous products and SKUs that we had. So with these fine-tuned approaches, again, we've been able to scale further. But what you see here is, of course, I'm sure you've noticed already, across the whole time frame, this campaign now is the biggest, even though it's not even close to being the oldest campaign. And this is because then at some point we tried our last, big angle and shift. And this was a very coherent, consolidated PMax campaign. So our asset group structure now looks like that, right? We have a whole bunch of them, and totally we had 15 asset groups in this particular campaign. And those we are literally constantly refining, right? So 15 asset groups. This PMax campaign now is also a worldwide one. So we have tried our individual best performing countries. So for some time, for example, the Netherlands, for whatever reason, performed extremely well during some seasonal holidays as well. So kind of made sense, but still, small country worked exceptionally well. The US, the UK, Austria, we are selling almost everywhere. And at some point we said, okay, for a short test, literally for a week or so, we clustered everything together in this gigantic PMax campaign that we have right here. And it turned out that this actually outperformed everything else, okay? I assume that's because, all the data is being aggregated in one campaign very, very successfully. And the point is, we're not just throwing everything in saying, hey, large PMax, all countries, let's call it a day. We are segmenting a ton within that PMax campaign, right? So every single asset group has its own products, its own categories, its own audience signals, its own audiences, its own well-crafted assets, right? So this has been an enormously complex setup so far. And those 15 asset groups, of course, that's only the tip of the iceberg, because we have done a ton of changes and adjustments within those asset groups. So it's not that if we were making new asset groups whenever we made a big change, probably we would be looking at like 60 or 70 asset groups. I'm not saying that because the more asset groups, the better, but I'm saying that because if you want to consolidate such a large account in terms of products and countries and everything into one big PMax, which in that particular case you worked very well, you have to be granular on the level below that, right? So either you are granular on the campaign level and you have like many campaigns and all doing their own stuff and everything works out well together. Or just as we do, we have like a mix. We still have many campaigns, but we have a very strong shift of the budget towards this PMax campaign. And in that case, the PMax campaign has to be complex within its setup. Otherwise, we would just not be able to control the products properly. So we started this in a very simple way, all products, one asset group, some coherent assets that made sense, came up with a useful audience for everything, and very quickly realized, okay, we're leaving performance on the table. The moment we actually scaled or turned that into more asset groups, I think we started with 5 or 6, where we went after some of the key topics. Again, I'm using Lord of the Rings as an example, even though it wasn't a key topic. But let's say, for example, Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and, I don't know, Spider-Man and something else, right? We came up with all these different topics where we realized, okay, demand is high based on certain countries. We then started with these asset groups and immediately saw a performance spike with custom research audiences, custom assets and everything. So then we branched this out into more categories. As I said, we had seasonal asset groups for a certain time where we say, okay, now we have to be very aggressive. We pushed out another manual asset group for a seasonal aspect, not necessarily the topic like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, etc. And again, gave us a push, right? And that's how we basically went forward all the time. Of course, we were playing with the ROAS targets. We started it with max conversion value. Then we switched, and whenever we were unprofitable or whenever, not really unprofitable, but lost performance, we came up with a target if this was going for more than a couple of days. And that was like a constant back and forth. So you can almost see this large PMax campaign here like as a giant experimentation and testing round, but one that ultimately gave us the best performance in the account now, right? As you saw, way above average in terms of profitability and of course also volume. And this just turned out to work extremely well. The point here is that if you have an account, and again, this is not even very, very large, right? At peak, we were spending like 60, 70,000 a month in actual US dollars, which is decent, but we had way bigger accounts than that and also have way bigger accounts than that. But I think it's a great example because even though the budget isn't crazy high, it's a great example if you have a scattered shop with many products, many SKUs, that breaking through that invisible ceiling is not really a matter of, finding like this one strategy that works forever and that will take you to 10x the budget and everything. But this constant refinement and, scaling 20%, stop working, doing something else, so that now after everything, we are at like plus 240% or what I've shown you there in that time frame. And that required many small and large steps to get to the point. And of course, we're not done yet. We now want to scale this by at least another 100% in the upcoming year. It's not a client that we think we can scale 10x very easily because of the competition and because of just the way the backend is structured. We had cases where we saw way more exponential growth than that at higher numbers. But nonetheless, I think it's important to do it like that. And, that's basically, I believe, how it's done and how you can scale an account, testing all the way through. Sometimes PMax is the answer, sometimes shopping is the answer, sometimes it's a mix. But that's really what I wanted to show you guys here real quick so that you get an understanding of how our process works in cases like that. So if you have an e-commerce brand and if you want to scale it to the next level, if you have issues, breaking through that invisible ceiling, as I said, if you spend 20K a month, you want to get to 40, if you spend 50, you want to get to 100, check the link in the description, cartlift.co, our site where we can jump on an Ignite call where I sit down with you and I tell you very specifically what I think is possible with your brand. It's not one of these super sales heavy calls. We're actually purely talking about what's in it for you, what's possible, how far do I think your brand could be scaled, and if everything sounds great, we may talk about how we can implement the strategy for you. And otherwise, you may just walk away with some sort of game plan that you can implement right away. So you can literally only win. With that being said, thank you very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, please subscribe for more Google Ads and performance marketing content for e-commerce. And I really look forward to see you in the next video again. Thank you very much and bye-bye.